So, Spider-Man Brand New Day just released, and I loved it. The costume is gorgeous and practical. Tom Holland finally feels like he's coming to his own as Peter Parker. I hope that director Destin Daniel Cretton is given the keys to these movies for the next 50 installments. And on the whole, it feels like this movie listened to the criticisms of the previous Home trilogy and set out to make a love letter to who Spider-Man is. The movie is absolutely making bank at the box office, breaking records left and right. Many of you would contribute the success to Spider-Man the character or Tom Holland, who's now starred in the top 4 opening weekends of all time. But you know who else was in those movies? That's right, the CEO himself. So really, when you think about it, maybe he's the key here. This video contains spoilers for Spider-Man Brand New Day. That's your warning. Okay, cool. Starting at the very beginning, I love how this movie opens. I think it's such a smart decision to use the Marvel logo as a semi-recap of what happened at the end of No Way Home, with Peter literally disappearing from the shots as they're happening. And then the movie throws us right into everything. We pick up with Peter 5 years after the events of No Way Home, and he's completely missed out on MJ and Ned's time at college, which honestly, I appreciate the movie letting me keep the college trilogy. That was very considerate of them. And I think the time jump allows Tom's performance to shine a lot more. I've always thought that he was great casting for Peter as far back as Civil War, but it always felt like the movies never really gave him the breathing room to really make the role his own. Say what you will about the Amazing Spider-Man duology, because there's a lot you could say about those, but even those movies gave Andrew Garfield the ability to give a truly outstanding performance despite all the, you know, bad stuff. And I think that this movie, with Destin Daniel Cretton and also the skills that Tom learned working with Christopher Nolan for the Odyssey, really lets him flex those muscles and come into his own. He's not playing the plucky young kid anymore. It's a bit more bite and edge to him that Spider-Man's been missing for kind of a long time. Not just in the movies, but also the games and even the comics. Speaking of bites, I got a giant spider bite on my knee this morning, so here's hoping, right? He feels like Josh Keaton's version of the character from Spectacular, while still retaining the elements that I loved from the previous movies. For the first time, Spider-Man feels like the one from Civil War.
Hey buddy, I think you lost this!
And with that time jump, we see that Peter's life as Spider-Man has completely changed. He's now in his 8th year. He's fighting various villains that we've never seen in live action, like Boomerang, Tarantula, Ramrod, Marvin Jones's Tombstone, and also Michael Mando as Mac Gargan the Scorpion, who finally returns after Homecoming, and even recreating iconic comic covers in live action. These villains were all over the marketing despite having such limited screen time. Like Boomerang is on the AMC cup that I got, and this is the only shot he's in the entire movie. It's very possible that this is a Fantastic Four first step situation, where a lot of the opening montage was trimmed down for pacing, but I would have loved if Scorpion especially got his own movie as the main villain, because he's such a great character that they can really do a lot with. But at the very least, his inclusion here along with the other villains gives Tom Spidey a much needed roster of a rogues gallery and makes this world feel real and lived in, like Spider-Man's doing stuff even when we're not seeing it happen on screen. Before we keep going, one of my favorite moments in all of Spider-Man media is the wrestling scene in the first Sam Raimi movie. And speaking of wrestling, this video is brought to you by WWE Champions. Make sure you stick around to the end of the video because it helps the channel with the algorithm, but also I've got an exclusive promo code waiting for you at the end. SummerSlam just wrapped, but the celebration's still going strong in WWE Champions with massive in-game events featuring limited time superstars, exclusive rewards, and special content. WWE Champions is an official WWE mobile strategy puzzle game where matching gems charges up your superstar's signature moves and finishers. So instead of just matching tiles for points, every move is building toward pulling off those big iconic attacks. There are over 650 officially licensed WWE superstars to collect and recruit, from current stars to classic legends, so half the fun is putting together a roster of your favorite wrestlers and figuring out which teams work best together. Because every superstar has different movesets and gem types, so building the right lineup is what turns your roster into a headliner. As you level up and push toward League 7, you unlock even more events, competitive modes, and rewards. So there's always something new happening, and for new players, right now is the best time to jump in because there are more events, more rewards, and more limited time content happening right now. Use the link down below or the QR code on screen to download WWE Champions for free today, and use promo code SLAM to unlock 2-star gold Rhea Ripley the Judgment Day for free if you're a new player. Thanks to WWE Champions for sponsoring this video, and thanks to my patrons and channel members who help make these videos possible starting at just $1 a month. I really like that the movie explains Peter's apartment is filled with asbestos and essentially unlivable, which is how he's able to afford it despite not having a real job. It also emphasizes how private and isolated Peter is, literally moving out because someone recognized him on the floor. I've seen some people say that the girl in his apartment is Gwen Stacy, and I don't know, guys. I think that's just a blonde girl. I think we're reading too much into this. I'd love to see the Daily Bugle become a part of his life in the future because it's such an integral part of the character, but I liked how this apartment lets him stay even more private and isolated while explaining how he can live in a place like that. And I couldn't continue this video if I didn't talk about the costume, because oh my god, the costume in this movie is gorgeous. They took the design from the end of No Way Home and refined it slightly and created what is probably the best Spider-Man has ever looked on screen ever. One of my biggest issues with the previous 3 movies was that the costume department made these beautiful practical costumes that Tom wore while filming, each one costing like $1 million, and then they'd CGI over it. And the CGI was impressive, don't get me wrong, but it made Spider-Man look like a cartoon character. He was completely weightless, all the details and imperfections were smoothed out, and it took all of the humanity out of him. But this movie does the complete opposite. The costume is 100% practical as much as physically possible. It's a little bit looser with wrinkles and folds and imperfections that give it personality and texture. What little CG there is, like for the moving lenses, are more expressive than they've ever been, and the face shell that they used allowed for Tom's jaw movements to come through, making his physical performance that much stronger. It is made even better by the fact that Peter essentially wears the costume for the entire movie. At every opportunity when given the chance to take his mask off, even if he's held at gunpoint, he still keeps it on. Compare that to the last trilogy where he'd whip that puppy off every chance he got. I tie this back to No Way Home and how the events of that movie stemmed specifically from his identity being exposed. He lost absolutely everything in his life because he trusted the wrong people like Mysterio. So now he's keeping his identity so close to the chest that everybody looks at him like he's like the weird spider guy. And my favorite aspect was that in some shots you can see through the eye mesh and see Tom's real eyes, which is apparently something that happened by accident, but instead of erasing over it in post, they leaned into it. And it led to some of my favorite moments in the entire movie. When Peter's begging for help from the Hulk, you can literally see the fear in Tom Holland's actual eyes. It's a kind of personal touch that we've never seen from a Spider-Man movie, even the all-time greats. One of the biggest surprises of the movie, at least for me, because I had no idea she was going to be in this, and that's Detective Jean DeWolff, played by Liza Colon-Zayas. In all honesty, I was excited to see her purely because she's just a Spider-Man character that's never been in a movie before. Like, that sounds like a low bar, but that's my glup shitto moment, okay? Jean DeWolff's not a glup shitto, but you know what I mean. For those who don't know, Jean DeWolff first appeared in Marvel Team Up number 48 from 1976 by Bill Mantlo and Sal Buscema as a detective that Peter works alongside, and eventually the two of them form a really close friendship with each other. And nothing bad happens to her. Ever. I promise. Nothing bad famously happens to that character. Don't look up a famous story called The Death of Jean DeWolff. That's not real. Do I think that means they're going to go down the route of that story and introduce Sin Eater into the next Spider-Man movie? As cool as that would be because Sin Eater fucking rocks, I don't think so. At least not directly adapting it. But DeWolff's death was a hugely foundational moment for the character of Peter Parker, and it started a chain reaction that directly led to the creation of Venom. Eddie Brock falsely identifies her killer, and because he got it wrong, he was fired from the Daily Bugle, and that led to him becoming Venom. Like, honestly, if we're talking about the most important deaths for Spider-Man, you've got Uncle Ben, which, you know, Gwen Stacy, Captain Stacy, and Jean DeWolff. That's the Mount Rushmore right there. Speaking of Jean DeWolff, one thing that the movie does that's like just kind of weird, and that's Peter using mass surveillance facial recognition software to track down criminals. Really taking some cues from Insomniac Spider-Man there, huh? Listen, I understand why it's in the movie. Narratively, it's just a way for Peter to get information and know where to go to continue the plot. It's really only like a couple throwaway lines. It's not like the entire story hinges on it or anything, but still, why would they do that? But it's right after bringing this up that he sees none other than the CEO of Sex himself, Ned Leeds, and subsequently MJ, who've both graduated MIT and moved back into the city. And I actually really like how they use these characters in this movie. A big part of that is because this movie actually gives the two of them the space to actually be characters. Throughout the home trilogy, Ned was just the Genki to Peter, and he didn't really feel like he existed outside of him. And MJ even less so. And here they get a couple of moments on their own. It's not a ton, but they feel like they're actual friends and have actual lives. Zendaya is genuinely one of the best actresses working right now, and so I was always really frustrated that the last trilogy barely gave her anything to work with. And while this movie isn't some groundbreaking character study into Michelle Jones-Watson, I think it's a start and actually gave her scenes and room to showcase that a bit more. I've seen people say that they want later movies to drop MJ and that her story is over, but I completely disagree. I think that there are so many potential layers to the MJ character that we're only now starting to peel back, and I want future installments to actually explore her a bit more. Also, like, that's literally his wife, dog, you know? I'd also want to be in movies with my partner and make $1 bajillion. I'm jumping ahead a bit, but I also really love that this movie doesn't just have them get back together right away. Even with the knowledge of the spell and her memories being wiped, MJ literally looks Peter in the eyes and tells him that she doesn't love him. She doesn't even know him. And it's the moment where Peter sees that MJ has a new boyfriend and has moved on, for lack of a better term, because from her perspective, there's nothing to move on from. And that's what triggers his powers to start acting up. He wakes up in a cocoon, he's stronger, his spider sense is more sensitive, and he now has organic web shooters. This is pulled pretty directly from The Other from 2005. Ironically, the Brand New Day era that this movie's based off of from 2008 was a story that literally undid the organic webs and he went back to mechanical. Now listen, I prefer mechanical web shooters and all that. I've talked about that before, but I really do love how this movie utilized the organic webs. Not only because it let this Peter have his moment of growth and learning to understand his powers that we skipped with the origin. Also, they look cool. Like his apartment looks like a Spirit Halloween now. I think that's pretty fun. But also thematically because it comes from Peter's sense of loneliness. Peter is burying himself in Spider-Man. For 5 years, he has had essentially zero human contact unless he's wearing a mask, to the point where the spider part of his body is overtaking the man because he allowed it to. And it's not until that scene in MJ's apartment with the three of them together, just talking about Legos and referencing Lord of the Rings, that he's able to start embracing that other side of him. It's the first time in 5 years that Peter Parker has actually allowed himself to be Peter Parker. And I like that the conclusion of this plot line is Peter accepting this new truth about himself and this new power-up instead of the movie framing it as a bad thing that needed to be fixed. The whole movie he's trying to suppress this change and reject this part of himself, but the balance between spider and man was something that Peter had to internally accept before his body could. Although it would have been sick if he turned into man spider, or at least grew a couple extra arms, but you can't win them all, okay? So many of the themes of this movie are inherently about isolation and the loneliness that comes from being special. And this is where we get to the biggest reveal of the movie, and that's Sadie Sink's mysterious character. The villain of the movie that was withheld from the entire marketing, Marvel's biggest secret, who Kevin Feige personally cast himself for a multi-picture deal. She's Jean Grey. and Steve Lacy spoiled it like a week before the movie came out. Now, this was probably the worst kept secret in all of comic book movies. I'm someone who doesn't like to follow leaks or rumors in the slightest, and I know I probably should for the channel, but I don't want to. And even I knew she was Jean Grey. And what's weird is that the reveal of her character doesn't really feel like a reveal. There's a little bit of a beat where they first say her name, or I think you're supposed to clap, but honestly, every time I've seen this movie, it was basically crickets, even in packed theaters. There was one guy on opening night who gave like a little whoop. Okay, I'll give him that. And Jean is where I think I have my most complicated thoughts when it comes to this movie. Firstly, I want to get the good out of the way. I think that Sadie Sink is great casting. She does a phenomenal job, especially in the more emotional scenes, which are the heart of the movie. She exists to mirror Peter's arc in this movie. She's someone who's so powerful, but also so deeply alone, and that loneliness is eating her up inside. And the moments that the two of them have at the end are really beautiful. I think that the concept of a telepath villain who hops between bodies is extremely cool. There's a sense of tension that comes from it, not knowing who you can trust, like she's like a ghost that's haunting the narrative. I also think that all the extras she hops into are phenomenal. Those sequences are so well choreographed and the kind of thing where everybody has to carry their own weight or else none of it works. It felt kind of like a Sam Raimi movie where he gives so much emphasis on just these random unnamed extras. And the way that they all moved for the body hopping, there's kind of like a creepiness to the whole thing. I also love the fake out with a VMAX as a MacGuffin. The whole movie, Peter and the audience and even Jean are chasing after this mysterious thing that nobody can explain. And I started thinking if it was the symbiote or another word for Cerebro, or even just like flip the letters around and put like a line there and it spells out X-Man. Only until we find out that VMAX isn't real at all, but instead the label on the air conditioning vent that was peeling off. And it was the last thing that Jean's sister saw before she died. It's a horrifying revelation that makes Jean lash out even more. I also think that the scene on the rooftop with Peter and MJ with Jean possessing her body is outstanding. It's such a gut punch of a moment for the character. I'd equate it to something like the moment in Homecoming where we find out Vulture is Liz's dad. It's playing with the audience's expectations and our knowledge of the source material and also our own knowledge of the actors' personal lives in a really interesting way. I don't think I've ever felt like a villain in a Spider-Man movie is just like cruel like that, you know? It's like she like is like reaching her hand in and grabbing Peter's heart and just twisting it around just for fun. But at the same time, I think that that leads directly into probably my biggest problem with Jean in this movie, because Jean Grey does some pretty messed up stuff in this movie. Not only does she take over people's bodies, which is inherently a little bit violating, including using MJ's body to kiss Peter without their consent, something that Peter then later apologizes for, which that's very cool, I appreciate that. She holds millions of people hostage by freezing the city, and she just randomly throws a completely innocent civilian in front of a taxi just to aura farm in front of Peter. Now, don't get me wrong, she's going through a lot. It's also not clear how old this version of Jean is. Jean Grey has been a morally complicated character in the past, and the movie goes out of its way to show that she's not killing anybody, like the damage control guards. Some people are saying that the taxi guy shows back up in the credits and that he's perfectly fine, although that's not totally clear. Oh, speaking of the credits, hang on really quick. I fucking love the credits of this movie. Destin Daniel Cretton is very good at filming cities and just making you fall in love with them. He did the same thing with LA for Wonder Man, and it makes me wish that more of this movie was shot on location because it's just so pretty. But anyway, sorry, back to Jean. Her motivations are completely understandable. A government facility kidnapped her sister and experimented on her to death. And I think that everything that Jean is doing to damage control is completely justified, especially with the context that she's a troubled kid who never had a guiding hand in her life and feels like the world is out to get her. Personally, I think that the line crossed for me was that moment with MJ, but also when she threw the guy in front of the car. It's just kind of a very difficult first impression for any character, even if the reasoning and backstory are completely justified and relatable. I've seen people say that characters like Loki and Bucky and Wanda did terrible things in their introductions, and they eventually became some of the most beloved characters in the whole MCU. Hell, a main character of this movie is the Punisher, whose whole thing is killing people. So why isn't Jean Grey getting that same Jean Grace? I thought that was clever. But I'm sorry. And I think that's honestly a perfectly fair argument, and kind of makes me question, like, why does it bother me, you know? I will say that Loki went through a pretty extensive redemption arc over the course of like a decade. Same with Wanda, who started out as a villain of the comics too. And the two of them aren't like moral beacons of purity like superhero characters, you know. They've always been a little bit more like anti-hero types, whereas this movie is asking us to simultaneously empathize with Jean and her motivations while also setting her up as the future main character of Marvel, while also trying to make her a formidable threat as the villain of a Spider-Man movie. And I feel like you can only do two of those without sacrificing the other one, and it's just tough because we know that this is Jean Grey. We know who this character is and that she's going to be one of the most, if not the most important character moving forward with the X-Men. So starting her off on this foot now means that it's going to be a bit of an uphill battle for her as an audience member. It'd be like if Sam Wilson kicked a dog during Winter Soldier, you know? Like, damn, dude, now you gotta work extra hard for me to like you. If you ask me, I think that if this was a different character than the Jean Grey, I'd feel a lot better about things. Like if it was Rogue, who started out as a villain, or Emma Frost, or even Mindworm or Mr. Negative, if we want to stick with Spider-Man characters, I wouldn't have as much of an issue with it, and in fact, I'd really like it. Damn, I kind of wish I was still doing fanboy rewrites, because this movie feels like perfect for one, you know? But if you ever see me doing that, then just know that, like, I owe somebody money. I also think it's kind of a bummer that so much of the Spider-Man movie was focused almost entirely on setting up the future of the X-Men, especially when the Spider-Man aspects were far and away my favorite part of the movie. I just kind of wanted more of that stuff. Now, that's not to say that I don't want any connections to a greater Marvel universe. In fact, I think that the way that this movie connects to the rest of the MCU is pretty outstanding. Firstly, Yelena was a really nice surprise. I love their chemistry that they have together, and that whole scene in her office was very fun. It sets up how the rest of the world sees Peter as kind of like a weirdo, you know, especially because Yelena herself in Thunderbolts was the one throwing herself into her work and living this destructive lifestyle. And I know I was just making fun of him, but Punisher is also incredible in this movie, not only because Tom and Bernthal have such great chemistry, but also I love how he connects directly into Peter's arc and being a mirror of what Peter could turn into if he's not careful. A lonely hermit who hides out in a cave and shuts himself off from the world. When Peter jokingly says that they're the same, Frank lashes out and says that every day of his life is painful. It's the kind of thematic and character relationships that make a thing like the MCU work. Despite the Marvel connections literally being a contractual obligation for the Sony deal, I never felt like we were connecting to the rest of the world at the cost of Spider-Man, but instead using the sandbox of characters to make the themes in the story even stronger. I'd even go so far to say that it all felt like a direct response to the Iron Boy Jr. criticism that I and a lot of other people had about the Home trilogy. Those movies, especially Homecoming and Far From Home, centered Peter's relationship with Iron Man as the driving narrative to the point where it felt like it was holding Peter's character back. Whereas here, all of the connections strengthen the themes in Peter's journey in a way that feels genuinely organic. Even Jean, who despite my issues with how she was introduced, connects really well to those same themes of loneliness and isolation. But my favorite character from the greater MCU has got to be Bruce Banner. The MCU's Hulk has been a character that hasn't really gotten the best treatment for the longest time, hugely in part because of some rights issues between Disney and Universal. That's a whole can of worms that honestly I don't think I even understand. But that's led to him being relegated to just a side character and not having a solo movie since 2008. We've gotten great moments with him, namely in the original Avengers, but for years, Mark Ruffalo's Hulk has been kind of turned into a joke, especially Endgame and onward with him merging into Professor Hulk. So I really love that this movie gave us probably the best Hulk we've seen in over a decade. And just like Jean, Punisher, and Yelena, he exists so organically in the movie. His story fits the themes and the journey that Peter's going through in a way that doesn't feel like he's shoehorned in for marketing reasons. It all just makes sense. He's someone who's also struggling with a literal monster inside of him that he's been fighting for basically all his life. And he's found a way to suppress it, but even that leads to him bottling it up inside, leading to it exploding later. I've seen people say that the movie just ignores the Professor Hulk arc, but they actually do explain that Jean messing in Bruce's mind is what snaps Banner back to the traditional duality. I also love how the movie doesn't confirm or deny if Hulk remembers Peter or not. It leaves things just vague enough and trusts the audience. It doesn't feel the need to like look at the camera and say, Hulk remembers you, you know? If anything, I'd say I wish he was in the movie even more. What we get of him is great, but he just kind of disappears from the story. They say that he's being taken to a psych ward and that's the last of him. And I never in a million years thought I'd be saying, I wish there was more MCU in my Spider-Man movie. But here I am. And that's just a testament to how well he was used here. I also really love the fight between Peter and Frank against a fully raged out Hulk and how they use the damage control facility as like a backdrop. Speaking of damage control, I've been talking about Jean like she's the villain of the movie because she's very much the main antagonist in a traditional sense. But I really love how damage control is actually the one to blame here. I've mentioned it before, but I love damage control becoming the MCU's way of tackling anti-mutant government regulation, taking a program that Tony Stark created literally at the beginning of Homecoming and twisting that legacy into the overarching villain for mutants and superpowered Marvel is really interesting. They've been sowing the seeds for this as far back as Ms. Marvel, and now we're finally seeing it pay off with this movie and with Wonder Man. Literally like 10 years of buildup. Genuinely, these guys might be the actual like big bad of post-Endgame Marvel. Move over Robert Downey Jr. And I love Spider-Man having to kind of reconcile with that in this movie. He put his faith and his trust into this institution, and Mr. Milkshake over here literally lies to his face. They kidnapped a little girl and tortured her to death. They're taking the technology of Spider-Man's villains like Shocker and secretly using to create anti-Spider-Man weapons to specifically use against him, which could be a nice lead into the Smides and the Spider Slayers in the future. One thing that I'm very interested in after this movie, and that's the future of the X-Men in the MCU. We see at the end of the movie that Jean is on a bus and heading upstate. And what's famously in upstate New York? That's right, Buffalo. And also the X-Mansion, I guess. I actually really appreciate that the movie was a little bit more subtle about that. The same as Hulk remembering Peter, it very easily could have like looked at the camera and yelled, she's gonna go meet Charles Xavier, everybody clap. But it trusted the audience enough to just show her leaving and we can guess what's gonna happen next. I'm really interested if the way that this movie handled Jean is a taste for how the MCU is gonna tackle mutants and the X-Men as a whole. Honestly, I kind of like the idea of an X-Men that are a more troubled group of kids with a bit more bite to them than your usual colorful superhero team. A little bit dirtier and rougher around the edges, you know, victims of a world that hates them and brought together by one man who wants to give them a home. It sort of reminds me of what X-Men Evolution did, which was take the team and translate them to the Y2K edge of the early 2000s. Especially with it being directed by Jake Schreier, I could see some of the Thunderbolts ideas and sensibilities working really well for the mutants. It could be a really cool way to distinguish this team from how we've seen them in the past, but still keep them to the core of what makes them special. A take that I've seen floating around is that because this movie technically did villain Jean Grey, then that means that this was the MCU's version of the Dark Phoenix saga, and that the movies will now be skipping that story that's been attempted and failed so many times. And if you ask me, I don't think so. If anything, I'd say they most certainly 100% are going to be doing Phoenix Saga now. Not only because the Phoenix Saga is so foundational to Jean's character development and her growth from childhood into adult, but also because this movie seems like it's sowing the seeds for that story, setting up that Jean is troubled and emotionally vulnerable and has a greater power that she doesn't fully understand. As much as I understand not wanting to retread that same ground, it's honestly something that can't really just be like skipped unless if you say that it already happened in the past. One decision that this movie makes that I've seen people not like, but I really loved, and that's Peter being the one that makes the universal inhibitor. Throughout basically the whole movie, characters are telling Peter that this inhibitor stuff is frankly pretty scary. MJ tells him that is pretty intense stuff that he's working on, and even Bruce Banner outright tells Peter that the idea of a universal inhibitor that can dampen anyone's powers is extremely dangerous and could have lasting impacts for the entire world. You can even argue that the shock and anger of Peter ignoring this advice is one of the reasons that he hulks out so bad in the first place. One mention of universal to Hulk and he loses his mind. And yet Peter builds it anyway, with good intentions of course, but still, he essentially hands damage control, the core technology that's going to oppress mutant kind for years to come. This kind of technology has only one end goal, and it rhymes with Sentinels. Retro Raggy, writer Marietta Sentinels. Spider-Man is a character that in a lot of media ends up creating his own villains unintentionally, and in trying to solve one problem fails to see the big picture and creates 1,000 more. It has so much potential to turn Peter into basically Marvel's Oppenheimer, and I'd love for later movies to explore the potential guilt that comes with that. How will that impact his future relationships with other mutants like Wolverine and Iceman or even Kitty Pryde? On one hand, I really hope that the next movie has more focus on Spider-Man related characters as opposed to more X-Men stuff. But on the other hand, that'd be really fucking sick, you know? And speaking of hands, let's talk about The Hand, because those guys were all over the marketing of this movie. I love that fight at the end. The fight choreography and stunt work was incredible. It's the kind of thing that I knew Destin Daniel Cretton was going to excel at after his work on Shang-Chi. And speaking of Shang-Chi, Marvel, you got a guy who made $100 trillion movie. Let him make Shang-Chi 2, and also uncancel Wonder Man. That was fucked up. I do gotta say, I feel like the marketing of the movie showed too much of the hand fight, especially because it was our big Act 3 final battle. On my first viewing, I kept feeling like there was gonna be something more and like waiting for the other shoe to drop, you know? I almost feel like because the whole third act was set in Damage Control, where they made a point to say that all of Spider-Man's villains were put, that it would have been neat to have the rest of them show back up again. Maybe instead of just fighting the Hand, he's fighting all of them under Jean's mind control. Like Tombstone and Boomerang and Tarantula and Scorpion. Okay, maybe not Scorpion. Scorpion got real fucked up. While the hand fight was basically all shown in marketing, what wasn't shown was the flashback scene with Aunt May and Jean, which I thought was spectacular. I'd argue that that scene is the real third act finale. I really love the theme of the movie being about loss and loneliness and how that applies to characters with powers. And May's message to always be proud of the things that make you special no matter what, buttoned off with Peter looking to Jean, who says she has no one, and saying, "You have me." It's the kind of thing that on repeat viewings I connected with more and more, and now it's my favorite part of the movie. And then Peter gets his shit rocked. Frank ends up taking a sniper shot at Jean, and Peter steps in to save her, putting him in the hospital. And I really like that moment between him and Frank in the hospital, and then Frank putting on the Spider-Man mask to let Peter walk out unmasked. Also, I like how Bernthal goes "Ooh" while he's wearing the mask. I thought that was funny. It was such a great visual, Peter walking through this crowd of people who adore him, whose lives he changed just by being Spider-Man and allowing himself, Peter Parker, to exist in that moment. And I absolutely adore that little connection that he has with that kid pretending to spin webs at him. The movie clearly understands how important of a symbol Spider-Man has become and what he represents. Spider-Man has inherently been a character about hope in a bleak world. He's a character that shows no matter what happens, no matter what the world throws at you, everything will be okay and you can have the strength to keep moving forward. Probably the biggest question that this movie leaves us off with has to do with the ending, and whether or not after the effects of Jean going in and messing around with their minds, if Ned and MJ now remember their life with Peter. Personally, I don't think so. I think undoing Doctor Strange's spell for the two characters that matter most would undermine the consequences of No Way Home's ending and reset the status quo to something that's not nearly as interesting as what the movie presented, especially when Jean herself says that there's no memories of Peter anywhere in MJ's mind. It's not something to be unlocked. There's nothing there to unlock, you know? But I do understand where people are getting this idea. Firstly, during the ending montage, we see MJ sitting on the roof of the high school holding the necklace that Peter gave to her in Far From Home, and when Jean has the whole city held hostage, we cut back to her and she's crying. So maybe Jean was able to unlock those memories in the same way that she messed with Banner's mind and undid Professor Hulk. And then in the final shot, Peter approaches Ned at the bodega, introduces himself, and the two of them do their secret little handshake. Then Ned sort of like shakes his head a little bit and goes, "Peter!" I see that moment with MJ being her still retaining the emotions that the rooftop and the necklace carry for her, even without the explicit memories. And maybe now that she knows her memory was lost, she's able to better understand those feelings and maybe embrace them. And Ned, I feel like the handshake is sort of like muscle memory for him. If you look at his face, he even looks kind of confused about what's going on and how he even knew how to do that. And him saying Peter isn't him remembering his best friend from high school, but it's him connecting this Peter to the Peter that he now knows as Spider-Man, you know? It's entirely likely that this ending is meant to be a little bit ambiguous. On my first watch, I didn't get that impression and I thought it was pretty clear, but I can understand why some people could have that other interpretation. In my opinion, the Doctor Strange memory spell was never something that's supposed to be undone. From a narrative standpoint, at least, I don't think it's satisfying satisfying to forgo all the growth and development that the characters have had in the past 10 years just to return to the same status quo. And I'd much rather live with the consequences of the spell, even if that means that reconnecting with Ned and MJ is a little bit more difficult for Peter. And that brings us to the after credits scene for this movie, where we see Ned's patented Spidey tracker on his foldable Samsung phone saying that there's a new Spider-Man found, but the location is unknown. It zooms out further and further until we're no longer on planet Earth anymore, and a new Spider-Man appears in outer space, before saying Spider-Man will return. Now, this could mean a couple of different things. It could be a tease for Miles Morales, either with the Spider-Verse movies or a live-action version. Tom has been outspoken about wanting Miles to show up and pass the torch along, and he's even said that they have a plan now to bring that character in. If you ask me, as much as I love Miles, because I really love Miles, I kind of want at least one more movie with Peter as the main lead before we bring him in. If nothing else, because I love this new direction for the character so much that I want to sit with it a little bit longer before we pass the torch, you know? So instead, I think that this scene is just setting up Avengers Doomsday and Secret Wars. That movie looks like it's going to be pulling from Jonathan Hickman's time on Avengers and New Avengers, with the incursions which led directly into Secret Wars by him and Assad Ribic. And that lead up was literally about other Earths floating in the sky, showing up in space and colliding with each other. So I think that this means that another Earth, my guess Tobey Maguire's Earth, is now appearing in the sky as an incursion to lead into Doomsday. I can't confirm this because the movie's not out on digital as much as it would help making this video, but I've seen some people say that the number 96283 pops up on screen, which is the number for Tobey's universe. In terms of where they could go from here, there is a whole world of Spider-Man stories that are still open, and my brain's already started a rumbling trying to think of a video that doesn't rehash the stuff in my Trilogy video, which that means no Black Suit, no Black Cat, no Kraven, no Venom, no Scorpion, no Tombstone, no Kingpin, no Chameleon, no Daredevil, and no J. Jonah Jameson, I guess. Damn. At the end of the day, Spider-Man Brand New Day was spectacular. Whatever issues that I have with it are microscopic compared to what Destin Daniel Cretton brought to this character. And I hope that he's given the keys to Spider-Man in the same level of creative control for as long as he wants to. The first ever video I posted on this channel was a rewrite of Spider-Man Homecoming. I left that movie feeling like something was missing from the character, and I wanted to voice my opinion on what that was. And that created a chain reaction that literally changed the trajectory of my life for the better. I probably would not be standing here today if not for that video and for that movie. I left Far From Home feeling frustrated. The problems that I had with that movie had only gotten bigger, while the things that I loved about it felt pushed further and further into the background. And I left No Way Home feeling excited at the prospects of this massive change in the status quo, excited for the future of the character and what direction they could possibly go in next. It was electrifying and drove me to make a passion project of mine that became my most successful video on the channel. And I left Spider-Man Brand New Day feeling at peace. At peace that this is what the character is going to be moving forward. That the things that I love about Spider-Man and what he represents for me and so many people are now at the forefront. And under the creative vision of Destin Daniel Cretton and Tom Holland, Spider-Man is in good hands. But what did you think about Spider-Man Brand New Day? What did you think about Jean Grey in this movie? If you like this video, be sure to like button and subscribe. Thanks again to WWE Champions for sponsoring this video. Don't forget to use promo code SLAM to claim your free 2-star gold Rhea Ripley The Judgment Day. Special thanks to Mike Mood Gaming, Danny Waney, Dylan Leavitt 6477, Jay Tempest, Charlie Holman 8532, Mushel, Manasa, Ya Boy 906, Senagamer 24, Cacper Knight, Zanejay 9070, Serminator 1321, Darius Alston, I Hate Favorites, Petros 1960, Harry Gaming 1712, The Man W7J, Moozy 544, Dylan Sylvia 7107, Karagon, Kyle V8M7R, Christian Mateo, and Charles Foster Kane for joining the spectacular tier of my Patreon and channel members. This is my Boy 17 coming at you live. Be responsible, and I'll see you around.